Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Questions You Never Thought You Could Ask in Church. This is a podcast where we invite you, the listener, to text in whatever questions you might have about the spiritual life, about God, about different religions, and especially the Christian religion, about the way of Jesus and what it means to follow him in the world today. Our experience is that a lot of people carry a lot of deep questions about God's spirituality and the nature of life and don't know who to ask, or maybe are just simply afraid to ask because they don't trust the source of information. They don't know where to turn. They fear that people might judge them or any other number of things that come in. And sadly, the Christian church has been one of the biggest culprits of this in its history. Well, we believe something very different here. We believe God wants us to ask questions. We think questions are a sign of growing faith. We think questions are good, and questions are better brought into the light than hidden in the darkness. So text your questions in to 815-314-0363. Again, that's 815-314-0363. My name is David Gadini, here in the studio today with Andrew Metcalf.
Hello.
And Kent Jones producing. How you guys doing?
Good afternoon.
Good. Yeah, we're doing a Bible boot camp at our church this week, so it's been a whirlwind morning already.
Yeah, Bible boot camp is basically a vacation Bible school on steroids. Is that the fair way of putting it?
I think so, yeah.
Watching kids running around with these epic capture the flag battles and setting up forts in the woods, and it's
Doing,
like
marching chants, and
yeah.
I think half of them have lost their voices already, so your kids included.
Yeah, so my two kids are leading, or junior officers, if you will, this year. And it's almost like a challenge between them. Well, like, can I be hoarse by 10? You know?
Yeah, you're like, oh, it hurts.
You know what's kind of cool watching it with them, though, is I can honestly say I think they enjoy it now more as leaders than they did actually as kids. And that's no knock on how they enjoyed it as kids.
And I think that makes them better leaders then, too. Like, if you've gone through it, then
Right.
you understand the excitement, and that bleeds down to the kids, I think. So, yeah, I think everyone's having a blast, at least, from my vantage point, so...
Well, we were sitting here kind of getting ready for the program, and we hear this huge, what we just think is rainstorm pounding the roof on the place, going, is that rain? And Andrew's not quite sure if his windows are up. So
I'm pretty sure they are.
Now, did you hear what
think I
happened
left
in
them
your hometown? So Andrew's
I know
from
they
St.
got
Louis.
8 to 10 inches of rain?
Insane. It looks like a
in a
New
day.
Orleans flood. I mean, the streets there. So
I know the last time was 93, I think. 93, 94 was the last big flood in St. Louis.
That's right, when the Mississippi
rose.
Yeah.
It
was
rose 20 feet or something.
Yeah, it was
Crazy.
stupid. I mean, it was
But I haven't seen anything
Right.
like that since then.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know my family, their houses were all good. Some water in the basement, but nothing crazy. So, but I
Yeah.
know there's a lot of people, that houses are gone, cars underwater.
Yeah, Tina sent me some pictures. I got a daughter who goes down to school there, obviously, and her boyfriend's down there. And how you doing? He's like, well, yeah, I'm fine, but sending the pics back, I mean, it was just, well, your car might look like that when you go out, 3 feet of standing water.
It's true. It's true. Did I leave the sunroof open? Who knows?
And you ever do it? It's hot. It's summer. You leave it down 2 inches, and the wind just perfectly manipulates
always
that
catches it
crack.
just right,
And,
yeah. Exactly. But that'll teach you to leave your windows open.
Yeah.
Deal
there you
with
go.
the heat. It'll
there
be
you
fine.
go. Well, hey, what do we got in the inbox today? We've got quite a. I was taking a glance at this, going. I mean, I think we're hundreds deep at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing this in church on Sunday mornings, it seems like every year the questions just pour in.
Which is
great to have them
Yeah.
for kind of the next year to pull back to them. So
And,
if you asked a question on Sunday and we did not answer it a couple weeks ago,
And thanks for your patience. We will get to
you
your
just have
questions.
to listen every week for the
Hang in
next
there.
year,
Hang in there.
and we might get to it. But yeah, we'll just jump in at the top here.
Okay.
If we are supposed to love the sinner but not the sin, how are we supposed to love LGBTQ groups, teachers, and corporations like Disney, for example, who are trying to push a sexual agenda on young children? As Christians, are we supposed to rise up and speak against this?
Okay, so let's jump right into the deep end here. And again, thank you for asking. I mean, a lot of people come down on a lot of points on this and struggle with it. A couple of things maybe I want to unpack out of this. And let's just assume for a moment that LGBTQ and Disney are being used as examples of a greater issue. So I'm going to speak into the greater issue maybe rather than something highly specific like this. Though I will tell you, I finally went and saw Thor, Love and Thunder. Have you seen it yet?
Seen that one, no.
And, I saw this with the Multiverse of Madness, which came out earlier this summer, too. And, it's clear that there's an ideological agenda with Disney on LGBTQ lines, not because it's central to the story or interesting to the character, but just,
It's there.
Thor, Love, and Thunder, it's like, that was completely superfluous. It's just there because it's important to you. And, of course, many Christians have come across things throughout human history, today and in the past, where maybe an ideological position of a company, a political group, a country, for that matter, or whatever it might be, might seem to be at odds. I think I want to take the last part of this question, and it's kind of given me a moment of pause. And I think it's maybe what I need to address here. It says, as Christians, are we supposed to rise up and speak against this? Look, I'm all about like the free use of language, but I think it's revealing almost this like call to revolution. This the Christian's main duty is to stand up in defiance of the forces of evil and almost become a political force or a social force or even a violent force against something. And I really want to kind of steer us off thinking down those lines. I don't think that as Christians we are called to rise up. I'm not saying there's not a place for that in human history. And I certainly respect many people who have done, from Dietrich Bonhoeffer to Martin Luther King Jr. to other Christians who have risen up in various ways against evil and injustice. But it becomes a very slippery slope towards revenge, towards vigilanteist justice, if you will, towards missing what the fundamental Christian call is. And they hit it here. The asker, whoever you are, addressed it off the bat. We are called to love. The way we are called to rise up is love. Jesus himself says, you have heard it said, love your neighbor but hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. And then he goes to give a litany of examples. You can check this out in Matthew chapter 5. It's other places, Luke 6, 1 John. I mean, the Bible's chock full of this. The reality is there's a lot of people who try to push their agendas on us, a lot of people who believe things different than us, and a lot of people who are even militant or sinister about it. You're still called to love them. You're still called to pray for them. It doesn't mean you have to support them financially. It doesn't mean you need to go to their movies. It's kind of hard to talk about maybe rising up while you're still subscribing to Disney Plus. So check your own maybe hypocrisy in this and how you're navigating that. But no, pray for Disney if Disney is the issue in this. Pray for people in the LGBTQ pack and political movement if that's the issue for you. And love those who are individuals within it. That's fundamentally where it's at.
Yeah, and I think one, I don't want to say issue I have, but I guess clarification in their question is like, when they're saying that those places are trying to push a sexual agenda, that almost seems a little too aggressive to me. It's like, are they pushing a sexual agenda or are they just reflecting reality of the world? So it's like, do you define pushing a sexual agenda as, oh, they have a gay person on the show, or is it that they're trying to do something more than that?
Yeah,
so
and
it's like you don't know from this person's question at least, like which one that is.
And we don't we have to kind of check our motives. Like it's so easy to assume about other people and put a worst case construction on it. When I love Martin Luther's explanation of the 8th commandment, which is you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And he basically says, we're called to fear and love God. And then he gives a litany of things we shouldn't do. But then he also gives a litany of things we should do to kind of honor this commandment by God and the principle for which it stands. And one of the things he says in there is to always put the best construction on what someone does or says, which can really bring you into the realm of naivety.
Yeah.
But is that bad? Is it better to allow some naivety and be willing to give the best case scenario towards someone and what trajectory that will lead you to, as opposed to always being so quick to criticize and judge an ulterior motive, even though wisdom and experience has taught that is often the case.
Yeah.
There's something challenging in that.
Yeah, and I think even in the question they're asking, how are we supposed to love these people? So it seems like they're choosing to take that view of like, I want to think the best of them, I want to wish them the best, so how are we supposed to do that?
And maybe what it needs to come down to is translating our language from these people to this person. It's often too easy to talk about these people as a unified group, because someone might identify in one way with a certain cause or whatever, to make all kinds of other snap judgments about them as well. But maybe it's getting to know the individual person, listening to them, right? Praying for them, loving them in a specific way, and taking it from a theoretical idea to an actual practical, tangible idea.
Yeah, I think that's great too, because we're not called to love corporations.
No.
We're not called to love Disney. We're called to show our love to our neighbors.
Disney's a company.
And individuals. And I think that's a great point, because sometimes, we do just group everyone together in not even LGBTQ, but any
Whatever
organization, political, left, right, religious, Boy Scouts, whatever. It's like, you're dealing with an individual, and that's who you're called to love, the individual, not the thing that either they're a part of or they represent. It's
Right.
Aren't we? Isn't it giving us a chance to listen and have conversations? I mean, isn't that what Christ did? Hey, let me sit by you by the well. Let me ask you a couple questions.
Have dinner at your house,
Right.
Eat and laugh together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of, let me tell you why you're sinning.
Yeah. Yeah. The brood of viper language
That
really
goes
only
well.
came out in religious leaders, you
Right.
know? Now, Kent, you still have like the Magic Kingdom tattoo, right? Didn't you?
I love Goofy.
Yeah. I know it's your.
Is it Magic Kingdom
your
or just
spirit animal.
Tinkerbell?
It's
I can't-
Tinkerbell. That's
Yeah.
right. It's on my lower back.
I don't want to see that, Kent. You know, I'm just saying. You know.
Yeah. Well, listen, I love Disney. You growing up
Same
as
here.
a kid.
Same here.
Saturday nights or Sunday night, one of those
Sunday
two.
night
Sunday
was
night.
Michael
Oh, yeah.
Eisner would
The-
come on the
Yes.
sweater by the fireplace,
Yes.
you know.
But this is also an opportunity to not just have your children or your family programmed, or those that you care about. Let's talk about this. Did you catch what's happening here?
Right.
And if you're not paying attention, it'll seep in. I mean, that's how the devil works, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, and it's really a conversation starter.
Yeah.
I think, which is almost helpful in some ways, because
Yeah.
some of those topics are things that people generally avoid, but it's like, but you're going to run into it in the world. So how do you, as a, if you're a Christian family or Christian household, how do you prepare
Right.
your kids and the parents and everyone in that family to, how do I talk about this? How do I have a conversation about this?
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
Great question. What else do we have?
We're just gonna hit all of the top ticket items, I think.
Okay.
That seems to be it. So, do you believe that modern day abortion is comparable to child sacrifice to Baal in the Bible?
Okay. Good question. Hey, what other hot topic issues
I
can
think
we
the,
hit on
the next
today's
one is
show,
gun
you know?
control.
Gun control.
And then there's
yeah.
some.
Is Jesus a Republican or a Democrat?
Yeah.
You know?
And then there's something about a wall. I don't know if it's Jericho. Let's hit all the top ones.
All right. So, do you believe that modern day abortion is comparable to child sacrifice in the Bible to Baal? A couple of things. Just a fact check here. Child sacrifice was actually to Molech, not to Baal. Now, there is a little bit of debate in the scholarly world on that, but the prevailing consensus is Molech was the one that you would sacrifice your children to. But the point remains the same. No, I don't think it is comparable, but at the same time, there might be a similar value or principle behind each. So the reason that people would sacrifice to the gods in the Old Testament, I don't mean to Yahweh, I mean to the pagan pantheon, both BC and AD, was fundamentally rooted in the perception of a relationship that a god had with people. And the fundamental perception of a relationship that gods had with people is gods do not like people. They've got better things to do. At best, the gods treat people like impetuous kids at a preschool that you just got to kind of tolerate and put up with. At worst, the gods can't stand people and just are looking for any excuse
looking for a reason to wipe them out.
To wipe them out, get them out of the way, or make their lives miserable, or something like that. Almost like a kid stepping on ants. Like, if I even condescend to think about you, it's going to be for torture, right? So, the reason you would sacrifice to the gods in the ancient Near East culture and through cultures around the world was for one of two purposes. You either wanted to butter the god up or buy the god off. I always like to use the analogy of thinking of the pantheon like the mafia, right? you don't really want to get into a relationship with them, but you turn to them if you need something that you can't get from any other source, right? Or if you get in on the wrong side of them, you have to pay the extortion money to keep them off your back. And so that's why people would sacrifice their children to Molech or whatever gods it might be in the Bible. Because the greater the sacrifice, the greater the gesture, right? So if our nation is going in the toilet, if the enemies are at the gates, if the famine is going on too long, you get more and more desperate. And you see example of even the ancient Israelite kings doing this because I don't know what else to do. So let's try to buy off Molech, and people literally sacrificing their children to try to get the gods' favor, right?
Yeah.
That's not why people are aborting children today. So that's why I don't think the analogy holds. But I do think there is maybe one point of commonality that can exist between two, and it's the value that you put on a child. Because at some level, to talk crassly, we put a value judgment on everything in this world. On living people, on prenatal people, on future people and future generations that we'll never meet. And that leads to all kinds of decisions we make day to day, from the fossil fuels that we burn to how much plastic we put into a landfill to what we do with national debt for the future generation to, you know, I said we're going to get all the hot topics, right? So, I mean, what else can we get
Global warming, right?
You know, to just simple decisions of how I choose to live my life and how that affects my neighbor, right? And so, you know, abortion, I don't think anyone does it lightly, or I think very few people do it lightly. But at some point, there's a value judgment being made. That is this human life, and I believe that an unborn child is a human life, that is in my womb, worth as much as these other struggles, fears, difficulties, uncertainties. And so that has also maybe had a commonality throughout human history and child sacrifice, where it was the same thing. We have uncertainties about this, so maybe the child isn't worth the possibility of. And in that sense, yes, but not at a direct level.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one thing I thought of and wrote down while you were talking about the kind of the system in the Bible with the pagan gods was you're trying to like appease them. You're trying to,
You got it.
you know, get their favor. And what I thought of is how does that compare with the sacrificial system with Yahweh? As far as for forgiveness of sins, you're going to sacrifice this animal or bring in these crops. Like, to me, that seems like there's some similarities, but God is not asking for you to sacrifice your child. Other than one
Right.
instance.
One
and
instance
didn't happen.
in Genesis 22, and then he called it off last second, right?
So
Yeah.
is that part of the? Is that a societal time frame thing? Because we don't do that anymore. Yes, you have tithing, but we're not sacrificing animals anymore. Like, I don't know. Is there a similarity to that? And you can go, oh well, you know, God made you sacrifice animals, so why not sacrifice kids to these other gods? Like,
Yeah, great question. And you know, people who study and spend their lives writing about like comparative religions and taking sociological and anthropological look at religion in general, or maybe more specifically, worship, if you will, we'll make the claim, and I think it's a valid one, that across all space and time, across all cultures, the fundamental act of worship is sacrifice. That you are ascribing worth to something by denying yourself something or giving up something that is important to you. So yeah, I would say at that level, there is a certain sense of commonality, and of course the ancient Israelites didn't need to be taught what sacrifice was because it was just part of their cultural milieu and worldview. But you do see Leviticus and the Mosaic Law redirect it, because it does become far less about appeasing Yahweh. It really isn't about appeasing Yahweh at all, as it is about other things. Thankfulness to God and showing that. Expressing faith in God in showing that. And dealing with a consequence of pollution and sin and uncleanness that needs to be purged. And not so much to keep God from judging me and smiting me down, but just the inevitable consequence of what builds up in the muck. So the way I like to put it is like taking a shower, right? No one goes, well, the reason I'm getting dirty is because I'm being judged for my evil. It's just a consequence of living in the world, and you got to clean it off sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Think of sin the same way, in an Old Testament sacrificial kind of way.
Well, and it's a reminder to come back to God. I mean, how many times in our modern lives now is it like, well, everything's going great, so I haven't prayed for 2 months because I don't have anything to pray about. It's all great.
Right.
But then when something goes bad, now you're drawn back to God, and you're like, oh, I need something from you. Whereas this was a constant reminder to stay connected with God, I think, in that
There was, and what's interesting on that is the nature of how the sacrifice was then even celebrated. There's basically 5 kinds of sacrifices that the book of Leviticus will outline, and that's basically the playbook for ancient Israel. Like, okay, you want to do sacrifices? Here's how you do it, and here's the meaning attached to each. And you can read the first chapters of Leviticus, which I know does not sound like something you want to do, but
a project for the weekend.
But if you know what you're looking for and you know why you're doing it, then suddenly it does start to become interesting, and it lays out the purpose of the 5.
Yeah.
Now there is in there what's called like a sin offering, and there is in there like this guilt offering kind of thing. But most of them are things like fellowship offerings, peace offerings, whole burnt offerings, which is just a way of going, God, I love you and I want to show it. Mm-hmm. The same way you would buy an overpriced diamond ring for the girl you want to marry, right?
Yeah.
I have yet to see any guy really care about the ring. You know, unless it's a bragging right or something, but that's even weird.
Unless it gets lost, then they care about it.
Then they care about it. But it's an expression of love. And so that's what a sacrifice would do. I need this. I depend on these animals for my livelihood. Here, God, this is to you. Or it would be a fellowship offering, where it's like, God, I know I'm in communion with you. And by being in communion with you and the fact that you're in communion with that person and that person and that person, we're in communion with each other. And what better way than to celebrate communion than to eat together, right? And so a lot of these sacrifices would be, yeah, man, bring the, like we would do a pig roast. They, of course, wouldn't. But bring the cow, put it on the spit, and let's have barbecue together. And we're going to give some to God because we know that he is present here. But most of it, we're just going to feast on like it's 1999, you know, and enjoy it that way. Mm-hmm. Though I will say I had a terrible flu on December 31st, 1999, and spent the millennium in bed. Lousy way to bring in.
That is not a great way. So you weren't worried about Y2K at all. You were just worried about staying alive.
Pretty much, yeah. I think I slept for like 36 hours. My wife Tina, she'd come in and poke me with a stick once in a while.
Did the computers reset? I don't know, but he's still alive, so that's good.
For several of our listeners, 1999, it was a year.
It was a year.
It was a year.
We're not talking about before Jesus,
No,
1999.
no.
This is after.
It was a year. Back in the 1900s.
Oh my gosh.
Here, we got a quick question.
Quarter century ago.
It really was.
Stupid.
Isn't that crazy?
It's crazy we're in 2022.
Seems like yesterday. Right.
Hey, okay, let me give you a shout out here really quick, too. Today is my 26th anniversary.
Get out of here.
26.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
awesome.
Yeah.
Hey,
Riley
Tina,
told me 25,
congratulations.
so-
Riley's wrong.
Riley's
That's our
wrong.
youngest
She's a year
daughter. She was
behind.
not there for it. She don't.
Yeah. 26. That's fantastic,
Yeah.
bro. Thanks.
Now, what
Yeah,
is
good.
is there an item for 26, like silver or I don't know?
There's got to be, but like, what is it? It's the
questions you never thought you could ask in church.
the
Yeah.
Malorganite.
I
you
can
know,
pull a wood panel
Yeah,
off
the
here.
wood panel.
Here, take this
Right.
home to your wife. That's so like big plans to celebrate 26.
So here's
I
how
don't
we're
know.
celebrating it. Tina has been fighting an ongoing tooth issue for about 6 years. She had a root canal about 5 or 6 years ago, and the tooth socket underneath got like cracked or infected or something like that. And you know the only thing worse than having a root canal is then when the root canal doesn't
like
like
the aftermath?
yeah, right. And it didn't heal right. And for 6 years she's been walking around pretty much daily. Not bad enough to do anything about it, but just
there,
bad enough to always be frustrated by it.
Yeah.
So she finally got it yanked yesterday. Had to have the whole thing extracted. She's got to get the implant in. So she's swollen up today. And what's kind of cool is she is now officially a human chimera. She had to get like a bovine bone implant put in. So she's got like some cow bone going on in there. And it's like, yeah, you are a chimera, you know? This is awesome. We're going to sew some wings on her. We're going to get
I
like
just- I
the
wanna-
lizard man,
Uncomfortable,
some
yeah.
horns.
I want to congratulate Tina for putting up with this for 26 years. Tina, amazing.
Not just the two things.
Congratulations. Right?
So what we're looking for today is like the classic senior citizen restaurant that serves like pudding and soup. Yeah. You know?
Like anything you can eat
Any
through
recommendations?
A straw, yeah.
We're willing to drive up to an hour for a good soup and pudding place, you
Just
know?
blend up some crandles, call it a day.
Oh, gross.
Yeah.
Nothing like some good blended chicken to celebrate 26 years.
But
Is
if
Tina
she,
listening too?
yes, if she
I
starts
saw an old brother pop up there, so...
oh yeah, that's awesome. 26 years.
Hey,
is
love
awesome.
you, Tina.
Yeah.
God bless you, and you are a champion. The way you went into this, I mean, she went in brave. I'm such a ninny
Yeah.
with this kind of stuff, you know, absolute coward. But she's just like, let's do it. Let's go in.
That's awesome.
Good for you guys. That's fun. That is congratulations. That's
Thanks.
great. Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Okay, so our next question is a short question. I don't know if the answer will be short or not. We'll see. How did the devil snake get into the Garden of Eden?
You want to know an interesting bit of just trivia? In Genesis chapter 3, the snake is never identified as the devil. Now,
Interesting.
the Apostle
I don't know
John...
if it was a snake even for sure.
It does say
Because
it's a serpent.
Yeah,
it does
it's
say
a
it's a
serpent.
serpent.
But
The Apostle John makes the identification in Revelation chapter 12, calling that serpent the devil or Satan who led the world astray. So it's clearly a biblical idea. But there's actually a whole fascinating backlog of cultural information that can shed some light that I could talk about for way too long.
Not
in the
a
show
short
today.
answer.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to point you to the writings of a guy named Michael Heiser, who wrote an incredible book called The Unseen Realm, who tries to take, the ancient Near East worldview of spirituality, or the spirit world, if you will, and use it as a matrix by which to understand the Bible. The other guy you want to read is John Walton. He's an Old Testament professor, absolute stud, I believe up at Wheaton College, who's also done incredible work writing on this. And he's written a series of books called The Lost World of the Bible. And the Lost World of the Bible is the cultural, historic world that the Bible was written into and going alongside, that the writers of the Bible just assume you kind of know. And there's like the lost world of Genesis 1, the lost world of the flood, the lost world of the Canaanite conquest, lost world. I think there's like 10 of them out there. That he's written. That also will give some pretty incredible insight into this for those who want to go deep. But I will give a simple kind of answer. In the ancient Near East, they had temples. And temples would be consecrated over a 7-day period. Fascinating that creation is over a 7-day period. At the mouth of the temple would be a garden. And the garden would be the place where you would raise the crops and get the things you need. It would be a water source as well, and like kind of the mouth of it, that would provide the food and the flowers and all that you needed to give to the gods. Well, it's fascinating that in the 7 days of creation, you see Adam and Eve also put into a garden. You see these mirrors or these parallels to the ancient Near East temples happening, right?
Yeah.
Now, within the ancient Near East world, snakes were actually revered in many ways. Mythologically, I mean, don't get me wrong, the average person still saw a snake and went, ew, gross snake, and stepped on its head.
Yeah.
Right? But mythologically, there was a lot of what was considered spiritual and magical import put into it, and even kind of a servant of the god. You could think of the Pharaoh, who had, and I forget what you call that thing, but you know, the Pharaoh hat with a snake
head,
on the front, not because it was a symbol of evil, but it was a symbol of power, it was a symbol of divine favor, it was a symbol of magical or supernatural access and property, if you will. And so we gotta reverse our thinking of thinking that when Adam and Eve saw the serpent in the garden, that it was necessarily seen as something evil, if you will. And we also have to get away from this kind of thinking that the divine council or the other spirit beings or the angels or whatever you want to call them were somehow severed off from humanity. You really get this sense in Genesis, especially Genesis 6, where they're mating with humans. That's weird, right? Let's not go down that. But I'm trying to bring you into the ancient Near East view of it. That it would seem very normal that in a holy place like a temple garden, the spirits would be there and things like that. Now let me throw one more log on the fire, and this is kind of speculative. But when we hear serpent, we equate it to snake. When the ancient Near East heard serpent, and even the Middle Ages, they would often equate it to a dragon.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because when it says you're going to be cursed to slither on your belly, it's like, Well, if you were already doing that, that doesn't seem like a curse. It's
So
like,
you almost kind of think of
like
something
doesn't
like,
have legs? Is it an iguana? Like what?
but think about it this way, and think about it more. I believe it's history, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't think mythologically, because myth brings insight into reality. Think about it like Smaug in The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, right? I mean, the glory and the wonder and the power and the majesty, which would be what you would expect the Satan figure to be, especially if you go with the Lucifer train of thought that he was God's right-hand man and this being of majesty, being brought low to a slithery little snake, right? And, you can see this in Isaiah chapter 6, where you have these beings called seraphs, which etymologically, and this is a dangerous way to kind of figure it out, but etymologically means fiery serpent. They're flying around and they have wings. Well, it sounds more like a dragon, doesn't it? So just some ways to kind of think about that. It's not like he had to get into the garden. No, it's just part of the world. It's part of the life with God. I mean, the beings were there. I mean, it wouldn't have posed an oddity, I think, to Adam and Eve at all, given the way Genesis is written.
See, you thought Smaug from Lord of the Rings, and I went to the dragon from the Neverending Story. So two very different types of dragons.
Very different dragon, yeah.
I was like, one is white and furry and fluffy.
I thought that was like a big dog, and he flew with his ears.
I think it was, yeah. I haven't seen it for a very
All right, fact check us out
time.
there, guys. Never-ending Story. Was it a big white dog with fluffy ears that was flying, or was it a dragon? I think
it had a long, windy tail like a dragon.
Maybe it was a chimera, like Tina.
It could have been. Is Neverending Story all just about creation in the Garden of Eden? Who knows?
Now that's a mind blow there for you, right?
Well, we are right.
We're station break time, aren't we?
Yeah, we are right at the top of the hour. Kent, do you want to give us a shout out on 21.6?
I do. Of course, you're listening to 21.6 The Net. This is Questions You Never Thought You Could Ask in Church, live every Wednesday. Well, most every Wednesday anyway, at 12:30, from 12:30 to 1:30 Central. If you have questions, listen, this line is open 24/7. If you have questions, feel free to text them into 815-314-0363. If you're not doing anything on a Sunday morning around 10 a.m., go ahead and tune in to 21.6 The Net. Jump out to Fellowship of Faith, YouTube, Fellowship of Faith F+. And you can celebrate and worship right there live every Sunday, which is absolutely fantastic. And if you like, follow, subscribe to Fellowship of Faith, you'll know everything that's going on and happening in that world. And we would love to see you there and enjoy the time. Of course, this is a great show, and we need questions. Even though we have hundreds, we still need questions.
Yeah, bring them in. We cherish them. We want to help you.
Yeah.
We love thinking about it ourselves. Any question goes.
And I will say, sometimes the ones we get live during this Wednesday hour, sometimes those get precedence.
Yeah.
So,
they do. Yeah, right.
If you're wanting to get your question answered, make sure you ask it between 12:30 and 1:30.
Text it in or post it on Facebook. You got it.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we were talking about Molech and Baal a little bit earlier, and there's actually a question about this, so I figured let's just hit it today.
Okay.
Is there a difference between Molech and Baal?
Yeah, there is. And the answer is better most likely. Because every time that there's kind of a consensus, there's always like one rogue writer or scholar or author or whatever you want to call it who kind of comes up with an alternate theory. But most people see Molech as a god. Now, there is a minority group that sees Molech not so much relating to the name of a god as much as a religious practice. And then therefore that religious practice could be done to Baal or others, but most see Molech as one of the pantheon, Baal being another. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and you'll find both of them mentioned in the Bible in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So there we are. I think it's a dragon dog.
Yeah, it is kind of scaly. You're right.
Is it a cross between them? Because I think it had a long tail.
Let me put it up on
I think
screen
that's
for
scarier
everybody.
than Smaug. I gotta tell you.
Yeah.
I'd be a little more creeped out on that.
Yeah, that is kind of creepy.
And
I-
the 1990s reality of it. Is,
Yeah.
I had a
80s,
cuter thing in mind when I was thinking of it, but yeah, it's kind of a dragon dog.
Creepiest movie to this day over any horror, any slasher, any psychological thriller I've ever seen is Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal.
Yeah, that is.
Mid-'80s, it's like Muppets on some fantasy adventure.
I've
and
heard
it's
about it,
dark
yeah.
and it's twisted and it's like amazing in those ways. It is so creepy.
It is very creepy.
And basically it's about these crow-like beings trying to suck the soul, and you watch the Muppets get the soul sucked out of them, and bondage and slavery. It's like
Not the Muppets we're used to.
Right.
Kermit the Frog
right.
does not make an appearance.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, Kermit ain't on that one.
That is frightening.
It reminds me of that, though. Yeah.
Kind of weird.
So now you know, you got your little bit of 90s movie trivia.
80s movie trivia.
There you go.
Yeah.
So this one's a little bit longer with lots of questions built into it, which I enjoy. So
Okay.
it says, follow up to last week. I'm not sure exactly what week it's talking about. We're a little behind.
Anytime in the last 6 weeks, right?
Yeah. Do you believe God knows everything that will happen forever?
Okay.
If so, this would suggest God knows ahead of time when he will change his mind, assuming he does change his mind, as you've alluded to, Dave. It also suggests that God knows before he creates a human whether that human will hear the good news of Jesus and come to him. Are these fair assumptions? If so, is it fair to say that when God creates a human who knows won't accept him, that he's somehow using that to his glory?
Yeah, great set of questions here. Thank you for asking. And yes, these are fair assumptions, but they are incomplete assumptions. And this is the biggest danger I see when people study various religions, Christianity most notably, is that it's easy to latch on to one logical stream and then build everything around that while dismissing other data points as well. So, to go through it, does God know everything that will happen forever? Yes. Does this suggest that God knows ahead of time when he will change his mind? Yes, it certainly does.
And is it changing his mind, or is it what he...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It also suggests that God knows before he creates a human whether that human will hear the good news. Yeah, these are all fair assumptions, and this is all true. And that is one stream of thought you see through the Bible. But the Bible has more than one stream of thought, because you see another stream. And the other stream is clearly that human beings have volition, they have will, and that God gives them the freedom to choose and to decide. And that there is therefore with that responsibility and culpability on humans, and it is not God's fault. And how those two match up is the great paradox. And that's where you start blowing fuses in your mind. But the worst mistake you can make is to only accept one of the streams and not hold both in tension. And the analogy I like to use for this is looking at an iceberg. We all know the classic cliche that, you see the tip of the iceberg sticking above the water, but underneath is what you never see, and it is far more not only large, but also unified. We see various tips of truth in the Bible sticking up above the water. And it would be foolish to deny that those aren't reality or aren't there. That is revealed truth. What we don't know is how they connect underneath the water. But what the mistake is that many people make is they go, well, I choose that iceberg tip and I choose that iceberg tip, and they pretend like the other one doesn't exist. Well, that's when you hit things with big boats and you go underneath, right?
Yeah.
No. You got to hold both as being revealed truth. And how it connects underneath is simply beyond what God has revealed, or beyond what we as human beings have come to discover yet. And this is a lot what the task of theology is about, is continuing to study this thing and try to better understand the unseen parts, just like the field of science or math or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. And then to the final, does God use people to his glory? That is also a revealed truth. And he uses people to his glory, regardless of if they are with him or not, believe in him or not, for him or not, do good, do evil. He will still use things to his glory. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this question seems like it came right out of my head, but it did not. But I'm like, yeah, I can track exactly along with them as they're asking these questions and go, I have gone down those thought paths before,
yeah.
And that's
because
I
it's
think
a
how my
valid
mind
stream.
likes to work. Yeah. But as you have told me like many times, it's like, okay, but is that the only thing that you're paying attention to or thinking about?
Yeah.
Like you said, yeah, there are so many other aspects of God and things that have been revealed that have to work in tandem with whatever stream of consciousness you're going down. So I like that a lot.
And I think in any field of discipline, what this is revealing is just because something is logical, it doesn't make it true. And every field and discipline is filled with logical, very sound logical progression that ultimately leads to false conclusions, right? Because it isn't taking into account other data that's either just not being watched, that isn't being measured correctly, or that is simply unknown at the time. This happens in medicine, this happens in philosophy, this happens in historic reconstruction, this happens in mathematics, I mean, it's all over the place. This happens in engineering. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, so yeah, this is one of these cases where you got to kind of swim in multiple streams at the same time and hold them in tension or in paradox.
Yeah, which can be exhausting, but that's
It is.
that's part of the work.
It's part of the work. And it's good. And, you know, and honestly, what it does is it brings God back to a place of wonder and awe. Because you start standing up against something far bigger than you realized. And while you're simultaneously excited at what you're learning and discovering, you're seeing your field of vision open up far wider than it ever has about God. And so it kind of has this both, like, I've learned more and realized how much more I just don't know. And,
Yeah, whereas if you're only focusing on kind of that like one stream or that one tip of the iceberg, it becomes very minimizing to
yeah,
God. And
I
you're
got
like,
him solved.
Oh, well, I get that, and like,
Yeah.
how dare you, or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I don't know. It creates a small God, which is scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kent.
Kelly says or asks, so would it be fair to say that no explanation of God in Bible is black and white or all-inclusive, no matter what a theologian believes?
Sort of, kind of. I'm going to get away from black and white language a little bit because sometimes that can imply that you can't know what it says. No, I mean, you can't know what it says. Love your enemy. Well, what does that mean? Well, love your enemy. I mean, you know, there's not a lot of latitude with that. But Kelly, thank you so much for asking. I think you are on the right track here of something that I want to nuance a little bit differently. I think it's better to say this, that there are absolute truths in the Bible, but no one knows truth absolutely. And so we can take what God has revealed and with certainty and assurance plant our feet on it with stability, but also have to maintain a humility, knowing that we see now, as Paul will put it, as in a reflection or through a looking glass dimly. And we are awaiting a day when we are going to see the greater revelation of who God is.
Yeah.
That shouldn't lead us to reject or relativize what God reveals now. We just don't have the complete revelation yet.
Yeah, we're not there fully yet.
Yeah.
And that's, again, probably a good thing.
It probably is. Yeah, right.
I don't know that I want to know everything.
Like, were you Andrew, it might be a little before your time, but in the 2000s, early 2000s, Kent, were you ever a Smallville fan?
Ooh. I watched it in like the 2010s.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
yeah, so
after
you
the
watched
fact.
it after.
Yeah, it was
So I've
good.
seen all of it.
You know, and I'm fuzzy on this, and the people who swim in this stream are just gonna kind of like I'm gonna fail you right now.
I have it all on DVD if you would like to catch back up. So
But
do
you
own
know,
all
the
of it.
Superman villains. Who is the villain who's just kind of like that like eternal mind? He's
Lex.
no,
Luthor?
not Lex Luthor. He's one that comes from space. He's one of those. It's not like Dark Side. It's not
yeah, I don't
one of those. But there's this one.
Dang it! What is
Yeah,
his name?
you know who I'm talking
I know
about,
exactly
right?
who you're talking about.
Pinky in the brain.
And it's almost like this
The big guy that they bury, and I can't remember.
extra-terrestrial that comes down, who's like a higher power, higher mind, not God, but knows all things almost, and is the source of all knowledge, and is beyond human understanding, beyond belief. And there's this it's one of the seasons that plays a lot with this villain. It's probably like 7, 8, or 9, or whatever, where a human comes into access with this mind, and the result is it puts him catatonic.
Oh, yeah.
Because the human mind is not capable of understanding, firing at that level of synapse, or comprehending at that level. And sometimes I think, to your point, Andrew, that's kind of what it's like with God. That's my really messy, bad analogy, because I can't even remember the stupid character's name. You know?
Doomsday.
It wasn't
Doomsday?
Doomsday.
That's not who
No,
you're thinking
no,
of?
it's not Doomsday. It's another one.
He's the one that kills Superman.
Yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter, but the point being made, yeah. We are mortal, and at some level, yeah. We've all faced some of like the circuit frying, like this side of eternity.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I just always think of that episode. I got homework to do. All right.
Got to catch up on Neverending Story and Smallville.
But not Dark Crystal, because it creeps me out. All right.
Let's see. If a person repeatedly sees repeating numbers, such as, I think these are times, 1111, 333, 555, could it be that God is speaking to them through numbers?
Good question, to which I need to answer carefully. if we were here in the studio together and you were asking this question, the question I would ask you is, what do you mean by God speaking to you? What I don't think repeating numbers are doing is serving as some kind of sign or omen that God is using in some kind of direct way to you here and today to tell you how much you should bid on a house, or which road you should take, or which of 7 options before you should choose, or some like deep esoteric truth that's meant to pop out through the scenes. However, if you do see repeating numbers in a text, oftentimes it is a device being used by that author. And so the trick is not to figure out what is God saying to me. The trick is to figure out what does the author mean by the use of this device. Because it's through that what that author wants to communicate to you about God will occur, and through which God will speak. Yeah. So does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
And sometimes I think very well intentioned, this has gotten off, even in recent human history. Do you remember the Bible Code? Kent, you remember the Bible Code? Yeah. Was that 90s or was that 2000s?
Yeah, 90s.
All the rage. Basic idea behind it is in both Greek and Hebrew, the languages of the Bible, the letters also are the same symbol for the numbers. Mm-hmm. And so can you matrix the letters out of the biblical text to find numeric patterns, or even like acrostic word puzzles, and through that to find secret and hidden messages that God is trying to communicate? Well, that's getting kind of far afield.
It is, but it was
it's fascinating.
It was a book.
But it was a book, and it's fascinating. And believe me, that kind of stuff tantalizes me. But it's really it's looking for God in secret and unrevealed things instead of listening to what God has said plainly.
What He has revealed.
And that's
they say that
the danger.
They say that's how what is it, DB Cooper or whatever?
Yeah.
That's how.
Have you been watching that on Netflix? Yeah.
That's how he communicates too.
What I didn't realize, Kent, is how ubiquitous in pop culture DB Cooper actually was.
Right, I didn't know either.
I never caught these references.
Neither did I.
So thank you, Netflix.
That's what I said too. I go, that happened when I was 2 years old. How?
Did you see it, Andrew? Or? No, it's at least the first episode's worth your time.
Yeah.
The other dumb one that got me roped in right now is Skinwalker Ranch.
Oh, I haven't got that. Really?
Okay.
It's a good one?
Yeah, it's
one of those mindless ones.
I swim in. I enjoy it. I'll leave it at that.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'll watch.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that, like, you kind of roll your eyes at a little bit in the day, but when you're watching it at home at night, and like especially where I live, where it's all like cornfields and stuff, you're like looking over the shoulder.
There's definitely shows that are daytime shows.
That's
when
right.
I can have the windows open and the sunshine coming in.
And it's laughable in the day. It's even just like but you binge watch it for 4 hours at night, and it suggests things.
It's the music that throws.
It's the music, and the editing is
that's why I love
perfect.
The ability.
It's just
I always have the mute button on when I'm like, this might get scary. Turn the volume down. Because scary movies are not scary at all if there's no sound.
If there's no sound,
not at all. Right.
Don't go in there. Don't go in there.
Yelling at the screen. Why did they have to eat unleavened bread in the Bible? Is yeast evil?
Oh man, good question, and I sure hope not.
Riley's gonna have some problems if it is.
Oh my gosh, great question. No, yeast is not evil. And the point behind unleavened bread is not because there is some inherent evilness or hygienic issue or something like that to yeast. It is purely symbolic. What it finds its roots in is the Passover. And the Passover is the final sign that takes place when Israel is enslaved in Egypt. And what God tells the Israelites to do is to eat in haste. And because they have to eat in haste, because in a moment, God is going to call them to finally flee Egypt. Now, they've been there 400 years waiting. But God's going to go, when I say move, you're going to have to move and do it now. And so, bake bread and slaughter the lamb and paint the blood on the doorpost because the angel of death is going to come and slay the firstborn of every Egyptian, but pass over anyone who's covered by the blood. Highly symbolic there, right? Yeah. But they're called to, they got to eat because they need their energy, right? And they're called to make it in haste because they got to go in an instant. Well, that means you don't have time for bread to rise. So make some pancakes, whip it up, do it quick, right?
Yeah.
And so Israel was called to celebrate Passover every year to remember how God delivered them. And so, as a result of doing this, yeast or leavened bread came on to take a symbolic quality. And the symbolic quality can be invested with a few different things. One is delaying when God says and not acting in obedience. And two is the way that sin has a way of infiltrating and taking over. So, yeast, as Jesus will put it, or Paul will comment on it as well, though little, taints the whole batch, right? It affects the whole. A little bit comes in, and everything is changed because of it. Sin is the same way, right? But it is purely symbolic and illustrative. It has nothing to do with something inherently wrong in yeast.
What about gluten?
Now, gluten is another matter. We have all been, we know now, right, Kent, that gluten is of the devil, right? Pure evil.
Pure evil.
Absolutely, but so delicious.
In fact, there are some scholars who claim that the fruit of the tree was actually gluten-based and not actually the apples.
Yeah.
Right?
Had nothing to do with fruit.
Can pastries grow on trees? I don't
Pastries
know.
grow on. I want to grow that tree if
Go back
pastries
to the
can
Garden
grow
of
on.
Eden.
It was a donut.
Forget about whether the devil was a snake or not. I want the pastries from the tree.
And cooked in trans fat, too, you know?
Right.
Always deep fried. Always.
Always.
Probably have time for one or two more.
All right. Yeah, we're kind of coming into the pocket here, aren't we?
Yeah.
What's the euchre term? We're in the barn?
Yeah, in the barn.
We're in the barn.
I've played euchre. I've never.
Yeah, ninth point is in the barn.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to pull that out and impress my family. So.
And then they will be impressed.
They'll be like, "Wow, he really knows. He really knows his euchre."
Yeah, he's picking up in
Or they'll
Illinois.
look at me like, "What are you saying?"
And Andrew's gleaming with pride.
I'm
It's
surprised.
an Illinois thing. You wouldn't get it. Yeah.
I'm surprised that euchre went as far south as St. Louis. Usually that's a
Yeah, and
that's
I thought it was a
northern-
Wisconsin thing,
Yeah, it's
actually.
Wisconsin.
St. Louis and Nebraska. I've played at both places.
wow.
Okay. Okay.
It's traveling the world.
Hey, let us know if you're outside of the greater, the Great Lakes region, the upper Midwest, if euchre is a phenomenon by you, especially if you're listening internationally today. We'd like to know.
And 5 bonus points if you can spell euchre.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
I still don't know how to spell it.
Yeah, I know. It's like,
Euchre and entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Back to back. Is America mentioned in the Bible? Is America mentioned in the book of Revelation? So,
no, thanks. Great question. Not directly. You're not going to find America, United States of America, or anything like that. The only way that you will ever find America mentioned in the Bible is just when it speaks about the world at large. Where I think of like Isaiah chapter 11, for example, where he starts going around talking about all the regions in the ancient Near East, and then he talks about, and the islands across the sea. Like, they didn't know America was there, but they knew that there was more out there.
somewhere.
And so America would be a part of that, arguably. But no, to try to find America in end time speculation in Revelation or Ezekiel or Daniel, I think is not doing justice to what the authors of these great Bible books are trying to get at, and is kind of leading you down the wrong road. Doesn't mean the message of the Bible doesn't apply to America. Applies to every people and nation, but not directly. So,
yeah, and I think I believe it's in the church, the Mormon church, that America is talked about more specifically in the Book of Mormon. So maybe that's something
true.
that you're picking up from. Like, there are some religions that have America in it, but those are more modern.
That's true. But even without getting into what I would call non-Christian sects, for lack of a better word, like Mormonism, you will see this in a lot of dispensational end times oriented fundamentalists and evangelicals in the Christian tradition. The classic like late 90s, early 2000 Left Behind book by Jenkins and LaHaye. I think like maybe Dr. David Jeremiah, who's a Bible teacher I highly respect and highly love. I just think he's wrong in his eschatology. And others will try to extract out of Revelation and Ezekiel references that they equate to the states.
Interesting.
I just, no. I'll just leave it at that. I know that's very blanket and kind of condescending, but
such
no,
an American
it's
question, isn't
it's
it?
not there.
Yeah.
What about America?
Are we central to everything in the universe?
Yeah, exactly.
Or just ourselves?
Right.
We have one more America question. So,
Okay.
Do you feel America is under attack by the spirit of Jezebel?
I just love the way that's worded. That's fantastic.
I don't know that I've ever asked it in that way.
I think we should, and again, I'm not, thank you for asking this, and I love the way you put it, and I know what you're getting at, but we kind of lose biblical language like this a little bit. I mean, don't you just like want to walk around for the rest of the week going, are you being afflicted by Jezebel today? You know, is the spirit of Jezebel upon you or attacking you?
Can you give a definition of spirit of Jezebel?
Yeah, so you really got to kind of root it to who Jezebel is. And it even kind of has made its way into kind of popular language, like you don't see too many girls named Jezebel, right?
That's true.
And I don't
know
hear...
if I knew one.
Right. It's like naming your son Judas. It just doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen
today.
Yeah.
So Jezebel was a pagan princess who was married off to the Israelite king of Ahab. All right? She comes into play in the Elijah story, and she is the primary power. She is the one who wears the pants in the family. Ahab is the king of Israel, but Jezebel is calling the shots.
Gotcha.
And there's a showdown between Ahab and Jezebel over against Elijah over the god or gods of Israel. Will it be Baal and Molech and the others, or will it be Yahweh? And as a prophet of God, Elijah goes head to head with him, and Jezebel won't have it, and she puts a bounty out on Ahab, or rather on Elijah's life, and wants him dead. So she becomes kind of the archetype, the quintessential, like, antichrist, anti-God, if you will, fount of all evil and wrong, and you name it, in the spirit personified.
Serpent
is
of evil.
Jezebel.
Yeah.
So what we're kind of basically saying is there a spirit of evil here. The spirit of Jezebel, the spirit of corruption, spirit of spiritual compromise, spirit of immorality, spirit of idolatry. These are all things you can read about in 1 Kings 17, 18, 19, and on. She comes to a horrible end. It's like, I think she falls out of a window and gets eaten by dogs, and they only find her hands or something like that, if I remember it right. One of those stories that kept me reading the Bible in high school.
Bible's a fun story.
Yeah, it is.
It's a fun book.
But do I believe that, how was this put specifically?
Do you feel America is under attack by the spirit of Jezebel?
Sure, I absolutely do. I think we're all under the attack of the spirit of Jezebel. I think every nation is under attack of the spirit of Jezebel. I don't think it's a uniquely American-centric thing, but I certainly think it's part of what it means to live in this age before God comes again to set all things right. We live in a place where, as the New Testament will put it, the spirit of this age, the prince of the air, and 1,000 other terminologies that we can use along with the spirit of Jezebel. The Bible paints a picture that there is more going on in this world than meets the eye, and there are spiritual forces at work that are malevolent, and they're seeking to steal and kill and destroy. And they do it sometimes overtly, but far more often they do it by enticement, they do it by seduction, they do it by allurement, and this is much of what the symbolism of Revelation is about. And I'm going to go down trails on this because I could talk about this at length, but I'll just kind of leave it going, yes, but don't make it too pinpointed to one nation alone.
Yeah, I think that's something that at least I've heard a lot today, or in the last year or so, in political discord, in the news. Everything is like America is at its worst right now than it's ever been, and that anyone has ever been throughout history. And it's like, I don't know if you know history that well. Then, like, it seems like things are going pretty well.
and even more, even the way that Christians have written about history, because one thing is universally true in church history. Every church theologian of every single generation always decries the corruption of their generation with almost a longing eye, both on the good old days of the past and, of course, always on the eschaton of the future. Yeah. But every generation does this. I'm reading the sermons of Peter Marshall right now, who was a very prominent Presbyterian pastor, who died well before he should have, but was also the chaplain to the U.S. Senate. And it's amazing to read his sermons, to read about the challenges facing America, the corruption of America, the corruption of sin, the state of spirituality in the time. He's writing in the 1940s. And you can read his sermons like they are written in 2020 or 22. Wow. Yeah. And this is true of Augustine, this is true of Aquinas, this is true of Justin Martyr, this is true of, you go throughout. And that doesn't mean we should hold it lightly, but it does mean we should,
take that under advisement.
Take that under advisement, yeah. Well, we're hit the end of our time here today. Guys, we want to thank you for all these amazing questions that you're asking. Andrew, Kent, as always, good being in the studio with you guys, brothers. I love talking through this stuff, and hopefully this journey this past hour was helpful to you. If we did not get to your question yet, it is in our inbox. We will get to it, even if it takes us some time. Be patient with us and keep on tuning in. We go live every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Central Time. And if you missed past episodes, hey, catch us on Spotify, catch us through Google, catch us through whatever your podcast provider happens to be. You can always join us at fellowshipoffaith.org. Go to the FOF Plus page, and you will find past episodes listed there as well. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you again so much for listening. And if a question hits you before next week, text it in to 815-314-0363, and we'll take it from there. God bless you guys. Remember, God loves you and wants a life with you.
Questions you never thought you